The ballroom went silent when Beck's son Hui stood up and lifted his glass. Lena Anderson was still smiling from the toast someone had given a minute earlier. She had a bite of cake on her fork halfway to her mouth when she noticed her husband's face. It wasn't the face of a man about to say something sweet. "Everyone," Sun Hui said, tapping his glass with a spoon, "I have an announcement." Lena set her fork down slowly. Around the table, 40 guests turned to look at him. Business partners, cousins, his mother sitting stiff and proud near the head of the table. Lena's closest friend, Grace, who had flown in from Lagos just for this birthday. "Lena and I are getting divorced," Sun Hui said.
Getting a divorce.
For a second, nobody moved. Then a woman near the back gasped and a fork clattered against a plate. Lena felt her whole body go cold, but her face didn't change. She had learned over 11 years of marriage how to keep her face still even when her chest was caving in. Sun Hui reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded stack of papers. He walked around the table, past the flowers, past the birthday cake with her name written in gold icing, and set the papers down in front of her plate. I think it's time we're honest with everyone here, Sun Hui said. Our marriage has been over for a long time. I found someone who actually understands me, someone who sees me for who I am, not who I used to be. Lena looked past him, toward the far end of the room, and found Yoon Ha Rim sitting quietly among the guests, wearing a soft green dress, pretending she hadn't known this was coming. So she had been invited. Of course she had. Lena looked back at her husband. She didn't cry, she didn't raise her voice. She simply asked,
"Have you already made your decision?"
Yes, I have.
"Have you already made your decision?" "Yes," Sun Hui said. His voice had the coldness of a man who had rehearsed this. "I have." The room was so quiet, Lena could hear the air conditioning humming above them. She picked up the pen sitting beside the papers. He had even brought a pen, and signed her name on the line without reading a single clause. Her signature was steady. Her hand didn't shake. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her dress, and looked at him one last time. "Then I have nothing more to discuss with you," she said. She turned and walked out of the ballroom, past the stunned faces of people who had eaten at her table for years, past the flowers she had picked out herself that morning, past the birthday cake that would never be cut. Nobody followed her. Not even Grace, who sat frozen, unsure what had just happened. Outside, the night air in Seoul was cold enough to sting. Lena stood on the curb for a moment, waiting for her driver, and allowed herself exactly one breath that shook, just one. Then she pulled her coat tighter and got into the car. She did not cry on the ride home. She had cried enough in the past 6 months, alone in the bathroom with the water running so he wouldn't hear her. Tonight, something in her had gone quiet and still, like a switch had been flipped. She thought about the first time she met Sun Hui, 11 years ago, at an investment conference in New York. He had been ambitious and hungry then, not yet arrogant. She had liked that hunger. She had believed in it enough to marry him, move to Seoul, and quietly pour her own money into his struggling company when nobody else would. She remembered the exact night she decided to help him. He had come home late, sat at the edge of their bed, and put his head in his hands. "I might lose everything," he had told her back then. "The Busan deal fell through. If I can't cover the loan by next month, the banks will take the company apart piece by piece." She hadn't said much that night. She had just held his hand and told him it would be okay. 2 days later, she called a lawyer in New York and quietly moved funds through Hala Capital, a company she had built years before she ever met him, using money from her own family's textile business. She told the lawyer to keep her name off everything. "Why hide it?" the lawyer had asked her. "Because I don't want him to feel like he owes me," she had said. "I want him to believe in himself again." She thought about that now, sitting in the back of the car, watching the streetlights blur past the window. She had given him that belief as a gift. He had spent it like it was owed to him. Nobody in that ballroom knew any of this. Not even Seon-wi fully understood it. He thought she was a wife who had nowhere else to go. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The next morning, Lena walked into the office of Jang Do-yeon, her attorney, before the sun had fully cleared the buildings outside his window. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were tired, but her voice was clear. "The marriage is over," she said, sitting down across from him. "He made it official in front of 40 people last night." Do-yeon leaned forward. "Are you all right?" "I will be," she said. Then she placed a thick folder on his desk. "I need you to help me with something else." Do-yeon opened the folder and began reading. His eyebrows lifted slowly as he flipped through the pages. "Lena," he said, "this is—" "I know what it is," she said. Inside the folder were the documents that proved what almost nobody knew. 6 years earlier, when Seon-wi's company had been on the edge of bankruptcy, a private investment group called Hala Capital had stepped in and quietly financed his expansion into 3 new markets. Hala Capital had continued investing for years, always through intermediaries, always without ever putting Seon-wi's wife's name anywhere near the paperwork. Lena Anderson owned Hala Capital. She had built it slowly, using money from her own family's textile business back in the United States, long before she had ever met Seon-wi. When she saw her husband's company struggling and watched him panic over a debt he couldn't pay, she made a decision. She would help him, but she wouldn't tell him where the help came from. She didn't want credit. She didn't want him to feel like he owed her. She wanted him to believe in himself. "He never knew," Do-yeon said quietly, still staring at the documents. "No," Lena said. "He never asked either. He assumed the money came from investors who simply liked him. He never once wondered why an anonymous group kept saving his company again and again." Do-yeon closed the folder. "What do you want to do?" Lena looked at him steadily. "Withdraw everything, every investment, every credit line, every asset Hala Capital holds in his company. Follow the agreements exactly. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just what the contracts allow." Do-yeon hesitated. "Lena, you understand what this could do to his company. If Hala Capital pulls out entirely at the rate his expansion has grown, it could collapse the whole structure. Banks will panic, investors will run." "I know," she said. "Is that what you want, to destroy him?" Lena thought about that question for a long moment. She thought about the birthday dinner, about the divorce papers beside her cake, about Ha-rim's green dress, and the calm cruelty in her husband's voice as he told a room full of people that she never understood him. "I'm not destroying his company," she said finally. "I'm taking back what already belongs to me. What happens to his company after that is his problem, not mine." Do-yeon studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly and picked up his pen. "I'll start the paperwork today, but Lena, I have to ask you one more time, because once we file this, there's no quiet way to undo it. Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she said. "Some people are going to call you cruel," Do-yeon said gently. "Some people already think I'm nothing," Lena said. "I've been called worse by people who were supposed to love me." Do-yeon didn't argue with that. He simply began writing, and by the time Lena left his office, the wheels were already turning. That evening, Grace came over with a bottle of wine. Neither of them ended up opening. They sat on Lena's couch, the television playing quietly in the background, forgotten. "I still can't believe he did that in front of everyone," Grace said. "Your own birthday, your own cake." "He wanted an audience," Lena said. "He wanted witnesses so I couldn't make a scene, and so everyone would remember that he was the one who left first. And instead, you just signed the papers and walked out like it was nothing," Grace said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I don't know how you did that." "I wasn't calm because it didn't hurt," Lena said quietly. "I was calm because I had already grieved that marriage months ago, alone, in that house, while he was out with her. By the time he stood up with that microphone in his hand, there was nothing left in me to break." Grace reached over and squeezed her hand. "What are you going to do now?" "Take back what's mine," Lena said. "All of it." And after that, Lena looked toward the window at the lights of Seoul stretching into the distance. "After that, I'm going to build something that has my name on it, something nobody can take credit for but me." 3 days later, Hwang Mu-gyol, the chief financial officer of Son Hui's company, walked into his office holding a printed report, his face pale. "Sir, we have a problem." Son Hui was standing at the window, still riding the high of finally being free from a marriage he had grown tired of. He barely turned around. "What kind of problem?" "Hala Capital has begun withdrawing its investments, all of them. The credit line for the Busan expansion has been frozen. The equity position in our logistics division has been sold. It's happening fast." Son Hui laughed, a short, disbelieving laugh. "Hala Capital? That's impossible. They've never withdrawn anything in 6 years. Call them. Find out what's going on." "I tried. Their office won't take my calls. Their legal representative sent a formal notice this morning. They're exercising the withdrawal clause in our original agreement, completely within their rights." San Hui laughed again, a short, disbelieving laugh. "This has to be some kind of mistake, or a scare tactic from a competitor. Hala Capital doesn't just walk away, not after everything they've put into this company." "Sir, I don't think it's a mistake." "Fix it," San Hui said, waving his hand like he was swatting away a fly. "Send someone to talk to them. Offer better terms if you have to. I have a company to run, and I'm not going to panic over paperwork." Mu-gyol left the office with a knot in his stomach. He had been in finance long enough to know that this wasn't paperwork. This was the beginning of something much bigger. He went back to his own office and pulled up the contract history for Hala Capital, scrolling through 6 years of transactions. Every time the company had needed rescuing, Hala Capital had been there within days. Every single time. No other investor moved that fast or that consistently unless they had a reason far more personal than profit. He didn't say anything yet. He wanted to be sure before he said something that could not be unsaid. The next day, he tried calling Hala Capital's office directly. A polite assistant answered and told him that all inquiries needed to go through legal counsel. He asked for a name. She gave him Jang Do-yeon's office. He called Do-yeon's office 3 times that week. Each time, he was told the same thing. "Mr. Jang is unavailable to discuss active client matters." By the end of the week, Mu-gyol sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at spreadsheets that told a story he didn't want to believe yet. Within a week, everything Mu-gyol feared started coming true. The bank that had financed Sun Wee's newest hotel project called to reconsider his credit line, citing changes in investor confidence. 2 supplier companies that had extended him generous payment terms suddenly demanded payment up front. A logistics partner in Busan pulled out of a signed contract entirely, citing financial instability concerns that had somehow reached them before Sun Wee's own office understood what was happening. Sunwee sat in emergency meetings from morning until midnight. His executives spoke in tense, clipped sentences. Numbers that used to make him proud now made his stomach turn. The valuation dropped 11% this week alone, one advisor told him during a meeting that felt more like a funeral. If this continues, we'll need to restructure, possibly sell assets. This doesn't make sense, Sunwee said, running his hair through his hair. 6 years. 6 years we've worked with these people, and now, suddenly, out of nowhere, they pull everything? Nobody in the room answered him. Nobody wanted to be the one to say what they were all beginning to suspect. One of the younger executives, a woman named Park Soo-jin, who handled investor relations, finally spoke up. "Sir, whatever the reason, we need a plan for the next 30 days. If Hala Capital's withdrawal triggers our other lenders to reassess, we could be looking at a liquidity crisis by next month." "Then we find new investors," Sunwee snapped. "I built relationships with half the finance industry in this city. Someone will step in." "With respect," Soo-jin said carefully, "word is already spreading that Hala Capital pulled out. Investors talk to each other. Nobody wants to put money into a sinking ship, especially when they don't know why the ship started sinking in the first place." Sunwee rubbed his temples. "This is insane. 6 years of steady growth, and in 2 weeks it's falling apart because of one investor." "It wasn't one investor," Mughal said quietly. "It was the investor, the one holding up nearly 40% of our expansion capital." The room went still again. "Find out who's really behind it," Sunwee said, his voice low and dangerous. "I want a name by tomorrow morning." The room emptied slowly, executives filing out with their heads down, whispering to each other in the hallway once they were far enough from the office. Mughal stayed behind for a moment, watching Sunwee pace and back and forth by the window, and made a quiet decision to work through the night if that's what it took to find the answer his boss was demanding. Finally, Mughal spoke, his voice low. "Sir, I did some digging. I wanted to understand who actually controls Hala Capital. It took some effort because they've always operated through intermediaries, but I found the ownership records." Sunwee looked at him. "And?" Mughal hesitated so long that Sunwee slammed his hand on the table. "Say it." "It's Lena," Mughal said. "Hala Capital belongs to Lena, your wife." The room went completely silent. Sunwee stared at him like the words hadn't fully reached his brain yet. "That's not possible," he said. "Lena doesn't run companies. Lena manages a small investment portfolio. She's never even asked me about the business." "She's owned Hala Capital for over a decade," Mughal said. "The investment that saved us during the Busan crisis 6 years ago, the credit line that got us into the logistics deal, the capital behind the hotel expansion, all of it came from her company." Sunwee sat back slowly in his chair, the color draining from his face. He thought of Lena, sitting quietly at dinner parties while he talked about his business achievements. He thought of the nights she asked how his day went, and he brushed her off with one-word answers. He thought of every time he told friends and family that he had built everything himself, that no one had handed him anything. He thought of the divorce papers he had placed beside her birthday cake, and the calm, steady way she had signed them without even reading the terms. She knew this was coming before he did. 2 days later, Sunwee showed up at Lena's new apartment, the one she had moved into just after the divorce announcement. He hadn't called ahead, he simply showed up, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. Lena opened the door and looked at him without surprise. "I need to talk to you," he said. She stepped aside and let him in, mostly because she didn't want him causing a scene in the hallway. The apartment was smaller than the home they had shared, but it felt lighter somehow, less crowded with things she had never chosen. "Explain this to me," Sunwee said, standing in the middle of her living room. "Hala Capital, all of it. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "You never asked," Lena said simply. Don't do that, his voice rising. Don't act like this is some small oversight. You hid an entire company from me for years. You let me believe I built everything on my own. You did believe that, Lena said, even when the truth was right in front of you. You never once wondered why a mysterious investor kept saving your company at exactly the right moments. You never asked. You just accepted the help and moved forward, congratulating yourself for surviving. Sanhui's jaw tightened. Is this revenge? Is that what this is? You're trying to destroy me because I ended the marriage? You destroyed our marriage, Lena said. I simply stopped financing your life. There's a difference. He stepped closer, his frustration boiling over. Do you understand what's happening because of you? People are losing confidence in me. Banks are pulling back. My own board is questioning whether I can still run this company. That's not because of me, Lena said. That's because your company was never as strong as you believed it was. It was strong because I made sure it stayed strong. I'm not obligated to keep doing that for a man who humiliated me in front of 40 people. I apologized for how that happened, he said, though his tone still carried more anger than remorse. But you're punishing me. No, Lena said. I'm simply no longer available to save you. There's a difference between punishment and absence. He stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes, but he didn't say anything else. After a moment, he turned and left, slamming the door hard enough that it rattled the frame. Lena stood alone in the quiet apartment, her heart pounding, but her resolve didn't waver. She walked to the window and looked over the same city she had built a quiet life in for 11 years, always in someone else's shadow. She thought about calling Grace, but decided against it. Some moments needed to be sat with alone before they could be shared with anyone else. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Do-yeon. News outlets are starting to pick up on the story. Nothing with your name attached yet, but it's only a matter of time. Do you want me to prepare a statement? Lena thought about it for a long moment before replying. No statement. Let the numbers speak. I'm not interested in explaining myself to strangers. By the following week, business journalists across Seoul were writing about the sudden and dramatic downturn of Sanhui's company. Most articles speculated about mismanagement, poor expansion strategy, or a falling out with an unnamed investor. Nobody had the full story yet, but everybody in the industry could feel that something significant had shifted. One evening, a reporter managed to get Lena's number and called her directly, asking for a comment on rumors that she was the woman behind Hala Capital. I have no comment, Lena said calmly, and ended the call. She didn't need headlines. She had never needed them. She had built an empire in silence for years, and she intended to keep her own peace in silence too, letting the results speak for themselves instead of chasing a story that was never really about revenge. The following weeks were brutal for Sanhui's company. What had once seemed unshakable now crumbled piece by piece. The hotel project in Busan was suspended indefinitely. 2 senior executives resigned, citing personal reasons that everyone understood were really about survival. The company's stock, which was never publicly listed but closely watched by private investors, saw its projected value cut nearly in half. His parents called an emergency family meeting. Sanhui's father, a stern man who had built the family's original business decades earlier, sat at the head of the table with his arms crossed. How could you let this happen? His father asked. I didn't let anything happen, Sanhui said. Lena pulled her investments. That's not something I could control. You could have controlled how you treated her, his mother said sharply. Do you have any idea what that woman did for this family? For years, I wondered how you kept surviving one crisis after another. I assumed it was luck or skill or connections. I never imagined my own daughter-in-law was quietly holding this entire business together while you paraded around taking credit. Mother, I'm not finished, she said, cutting him off. You humiliated her in front of everyone. You handed her divorce papers next to her own birthday cake, like she was nothing to you. And now you're surprised that a woman with that much dignity decided she was done saving a man who never once thanked her? Seon-hui had no answer. His father leaned forward. You need to fix this. Apologize to her, not because it will save the company, because it's the right thing to do. She won't listen, Seon-hui said quietly. Then you'll have earned that too, his father said. His younger sister, Seon-hui's only sibling, had stayed quiet through most of the meeting, but she finally spoke, her voice trembling with anger she had clearly been holding back for weeks. Do you remember when I got married? She asked him. Lena was the one who helped me plan everything when Mom was too busy. She stayed up with me the night before my wedding when I was panicking. She never once made me feel like an outsider in this family, even though half of you treated her like a foreigner who got lucky marrying into money. That's not fair, Seon-hui said. It's completely fair, her sister said. You knew what you had, you just never respected it enough to say so out loud. Seon-hui sat there, absorbing the weight of every accusation, unable to defend himself against any of it because deep down, he knew they were all true. His mother stood up and walked to the window, her back to the room. I keep thinking about her face at that dinner, she said quietly. How still she was, how she didn't scream or cry or make a scene. I raised you to have more decency than that, Seon-hui. I failed somewhere. You didn't fail, Mother. I did this, not you. Then fix it, she said, turning back to face him. Not the company. Fix yourself first. The company might not survive, but you still can. Not long after, Yoon Ha-rim began pulling away. At first, she still called him, still met him for dinner, still told him everything would be fine. But as the headlines grew worse and the whispers in Seoul's business circles grew louder, her calls became less frequent. Her excuses became longer. Eventually, she stopped answering altogether. Seon-hui finally caught up with her outside her apartment building one evening, the wind sharp against his face. You've been avoiding me, he said. I've been busy, Ha-rim said, not quite meeting his eyes. Busy, he repeated, for 3 weeks? She sighed, crossing her arms against the cold. Seon-hui, I think we should slow things down. Slow things down? I left my marriage for you. You didn't leave your marriage for me. You left because you were bored, and I happened to be there. Don't make this more than it was. That's not true, he said, though even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. Look, Seon-hui, she said, softer now, but no less final. I liked who you were when I met you. Successful, confident, in control. But right now, you're none of those things. I'm sorry, but I didn't sign up to watch someone's life fall apart. She turned and walked into her building without looking back. Seon-hui stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the cold biting through his coat, finally understanding that the woman he had risked everything for had never loved him at all. She had loved the image of him. The moment that image cracked, so did she. He thought about calling Lena just to hear a familiar voice, then remembered he had lost the right to call her the moment he placed those papers next to her cake. He put his phone back in his pocket and walked home alone through streets that suddenly felt much colder than they used to. That night he sat in his apartment, a place that felt too large and too empty now, and pulled out an old photo from a drawer. It was from their wedding, taken outside a small chapel near the coast, before any of the money, before any of the pressure, before he had learned to measure his worth by how many people admired him. In the photo, Lena was laughing at something out of frame, her head tilted back, completely unguarded. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen her laugh like that in real life. He tried to think of when it stopped and realized with a sick feeling that he genuinely didn't know. He had been too busy being congratulated to notice when his own wife had quietly stopped smiling around him. While Seon-hui's world crumbled, Lena's was quietly beginning to grow. She rented a modest office in downtown Seoul and started her own firm under her real name for the first time. No more hiding behind Hala Capital's anonymous structure, no more staying invisible so her husband could take the credit.
Word spread quickly. Investors who had heard whispers about the woman behind Hala Capital started requesting meetings. Business leaders who had once treated her simply as Seon-Hui's wife at dinner parties now wanted her advice on their own portfolios. Grace visited her at the new office one afternoon, looking around at the simple but elegant space with a proud smile. "You built all of this in secret? For years. I had no idea." "Neither did he," Lena said, sitting behind her new desk. "How does it feel, finally doing this out in the open?" Lena thought about it for a moment before... "Terrifying," she admitted, "but good, like I finally get to breathe." "You deserve this, after everything he put you through." "I didn't do this for revenge," Lena said quietly. "I did it because I was tired of disappearing." Grace reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "Well, the whole city is starting to notice you're not disappearing anymore." Within a month, Lena's firm had signed 3 new clients, all mid-sized companies looking for the same kind of steady, patient investment she had once quietly given her husband. She hired 2 analysts, both women who had been passed over for promotions at larger firms because their bosses assumed they lacked the killer instinct required for finance. "I don't want killer instinct here," Lena told them during their first week. "I want people who understand that behind every company is a person trying not to lose everything they built. That's how you invest wisely. You pay attention to what people are actually afraid of." One of the analysts, a sharp young woman named Yuna, asked her one afternoon, "Is it true what people are saying, that you were behind Hala Capital this whole time, even while you were married?" "It's true," Lena said simply. "Why did you hide it?" Lena considered the question for a moment before answering. "Because I thought love meant making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I don't believe that anymore." Yuna nodded slowly, writing something down in her notebook, though Lena suspected it had nothing to do with the meeting they were supposed to be having. 2 months after the divorce, Seon-Hui requested to see Lena again. This time he didn't show up unannounced. He asked through Doyeon, formally, respectfully, and waited for her answer. Lena agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe, neutral ground, somewhere without an audience. He looked different when he arrived, thinner, tired. The confidence that used to radiate from him had been replaced by something more careful, more humble. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sitting across from her. "You said this was important," Lena replied. He took a breath. "I'm not here to ask you to reverse anything. I'm not here to ask for money or investment or help saving the company. I just needed to say something to you, and I needed to say it in person." Lena waited. "I cheated on you. I humiliated you in front of people who respected you. I underestimated you for years, and honestly I think I did it because it was easier than admitting how much you were carrying for both of us. I treated your love like it was something I was entitled to instead of something you gave me freely. I never once thanked you for what you sacrificed to help me build this life. I'm sorry, Lena. I mean that." Lena studied his face for a long moment, searching for the arrogance that used to live there. It was gone, replaced by something more raw and honest. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table without drinking from it. "The company survived, barely," he said. "We had to sell 2 properties and let go of almost a third of our staff. My father stepped back in temporarily to help stabilize things. It's humbling working under him again after all these years." "How is that for you?" Lena asked, genuinely curious. "Harder than I expected," Seon-Hui admitted. "He doesn't say much, but I can feel him watching me, waiting to see if I actually learned anything from this, or if I'm just going to repeat the same mistakes once things get comfortable again." "And have you learned anything?" He looked up at her. I've learned that the people who love you quietly are usually the ones you take for granted the most because they never make you work for their loyalty. And I've learned that's exactly why you should never take them for granted at all. He hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been sitting on his chest since he sat down. Was there ever a time when you stopped loving me? Before the divorce, I mean. Was I already losing you long before that night? Lena considered the question carefully. I didn't stop loving you because of the divorce. I stopped loving the version of myself who kept accepting your disrespect. Somewhere along the way, loving you meant shrinking myself so you could feel bigger. I stopped loving that version of me long before you stood up at that dinner. Seon-hui looked down at his hands. Is there any chance, even a small one, that we could try again? Not for the company, not for appearances, just for us. No, Lena said gently but firmly. Not because I hate you, I don't, but I've finally learned that love should never require me to disappear. I won't go back to being invisible, not even for a version of you that's learned to apologize. He nodded slowly, accepting it, though the sadness in his eyes was clear. I understand, he said. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you were with Harem, did you ever think about what would happen to me? Not the company, just me. Did you think about what it would feel like to hear you announce our marriage was over in front of a room full of people? Seon-hui looked down at his hands, ashamed. Honestly, no. I convinced myself you'd be fine, that you were strong enough to not need me. I told myself that so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. I was strong enough, but strong doesn't mean it didn't hurt. I went home that night and sat on the floor of our closet for 2 hours because I didn't know where else to go. I didn't want the staff to see me cry. I didn't want anyone to see me break, not even in my own home. His eyes went glassy, and for the first time since the divorce, he looked like he genuinely understood the size of what he had done. I'm sorry, he said, again, quieter this time. I know it doesn't undo anything, but I am. I believe you. That doesn't mean I'm going back. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe filling the space between them. For what it's worth, Seon-hui said quietly, I hope your firm does well. I mean that. I know you do, Lena said, and for the first time since the divorce, she meant it kindly. Several months later, Seoul hosted one of its largest business conferences of the year, drawing investors and executives from across Asia. Lena attended as a guest speaker, her firm having grown steadily since its founding. She wore a simple navy dress, no need for anything flashy anymore. Her reputation spoke loud enough on its own. She was standing near the edge of the main hall, speaking with a group of investors, when she noticed Seon-hui across the room. His company had survived, barely, after months of restructuring and downsizing. It was smaller now, quieter, a shadow of what it used to be, but it was still standing, and so was he. Later that evening, after the formal panels ended, they found themselves near the same exit at the same time. Congratulations, he said, on everything you've built. I've heard nothing but good things. Thank you, Lena said. And your company. I'm glad it's still standing. Barely, he said, with a small, tired smile, but standing. They stood there for a moment, two people who used to share a life, now simply two professionals crossing paths at a conference. You look well, Seon-hui said. I am well, Lena said, and she meant it. Your firm just closed a deal with a group out of Singapore. That's impressive. Word travels fast in this city. It always did, he said, with a small laugh that carried no bitterness this time. I used to hate that about Seoul. Now I think it's the only reason I found out the truth about anything. Lena almost smiled at that. How's Mugyul? Still with you? He is. Turns out loyalty during the worst months matters more than I ever gave it credit for. He stayed when 3 other executives left. I promoted him to something closer to a partner now. Good, Lena said. He deserves that. He told me once during the worst week that he respected you more than he ever respected me, Seon-hui admitted. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Do you ever regret marrying me? Seon-hui asked quietly. Lena paused, considering the question honestly instead of rushing to answer it. No, she said finally. I regret forgetting myself while I was married to you. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead he simply nodded, accepting the answer for what it was. Take care of yourself, Seon-hui, Lena said. You too, Lena, he replied. You always did take care of everyone else first. I hope somebody's finally taking care of you now. I am, she said. Myself. She offered him a small, genuine smile, one without bitterness, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the evening air in Seoul was crisp, the city lights stretching out in every direction. Lena stepped onto the sidewalk, pulling her coat around her shoulders, when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It was a major international investor, someone she had been trying to secure a meeting with for weeks, finally calling to set something up. She smiled, answered the call, and kept walking, her voice steady and confident as she spoke into the phone. Yes, I can meet Thursday. Send over the portfolio details and I'll have my team review it before then. Looking forward to it. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. A year ago, she was the woman standing beside a man who took credit for her work, smiling politely at dinner parties while people asked her husband questions and never once turned to ask her anything at all. Now people called her directly. Now they wanted her opinion, her signature, her name on the deal. She thought about the version of herself who signed those divorce papers without flinching, and she felt something close to pride settle into her chest. That woman hadn't known what she was capable of yet. She had only known that she refused to beg for a place in a life that no longer wanted her. The city lights wrapped around her as she disappeared into the crowd, no longer the quiet wife standing in someone else's shadow, but a woman finally walking forward on her own, toward whatever came next, unafraid of building it herself. If this story moved you, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest, whether it was the birthday dinner, the boardroom collapse, or Lena finally choosing herself. And if you enjoyed this journey, give this video a like. It truly helps this channel grow and keep bringing you these stories every single week.